honest with you.
Did your dad ever show you his guns? Or
Oh, yes.
what
We
kind
were
of,
all trained.
What kind of guns did he have generally?
Well, he carried a mag. He always carried a gun. And this used to be the dining room, and the buffet used to be right here. And he'd come home for dinner, and he'd always put the gun on the buffet. Well, then I'd have to walk around, this way to go out to the kitchen, And I'd have to walk by that gun, and I swore it was going to go off. And that used to be the front bedroom. And of course, he slept on the window side, so the gun was on the nightstand. And I used to be worried if he lay flat, the gun might go off and shoot my mother. Now, isn't that funny? Yeah, but there were always guns around. But we never touched a gun or a weapon, as we were told. They weren't just guns, they were weapons. And we go out for a ride. My brothers, my father, in those days you could go out for a ride in the car, open the car door and shoot gophers, right from the dirt roads. So we all learned to shoot offhand growing up. Brothers didn't like guns.
Do you remember if that was a revolver that he had or an automatic pistol?
Oh, it was a revolver.
Was it 6 or 8 shots,
I don't know, but I know he had a .357 Magnum. But I think he kept that in the safe up.
Did he carry a shotgun?
He carried he carried the riot gun in the trunk of the car, the gas gun.
Oh, it was a tear gas gun.
Mm-hmm.
Was it like a shotgun with a tear gas pellet? Or?
It was a great big barrel, black case, about that long.
And how would he use that? Or did he ever have to use it?
Yeah. One night, it was right around Christmas time, and my mother and father were going, I was little, my mother and father were going to a dinner at the country club, dinner dance. Mother says, now Chuck, remember you have to take Mary, Catherine, and Ned down to Mama's. Okay, Catherine, I will, but I have an errand to run. And he said, then I'll drop them off. So Ned and I get in the car, and in those days you could stand up behind the driver and stand up in the car, and it was a great big old brown Buick, great big huge thing, little extra heavy, well, I can't say padding, and it wasn't the armored car, but it was a little thicker than normal. So we went down East Mercury onto Oklahoma Street, and we parked on the east side going north. There was this man by the name of Knight, and he had shot and killed people in Washington, and he worked his way through, and he killed somebody out in Ramsey, and shot and wounded a lot of people out on the flat at Butte. This is all memory. One, I think, was a Safeway man. So they knew that he was holed up someplace in Butte, but they didn't know where, but they also knew he was diabetic. So they had all this drugstores alerted that if anybody strange comes in for insulin or syringes, just don't say anything but notify the police. So it was there was a drugstore down on East Mercury, East Galena, and this little boy came in, 10-some odd years old, for insulin and syringes. Well, the druggist knew that nobody in this boy's family was diabetic, so they notified the police. So they figured the guy was holed up on Oklahoma Street, this little boy's house. So he was holding hostages. Well, they didn't want to. He had already killed so many people and wounded so many people. So anyway, my dad, we just drove up on this other side of the street, and he just got out, opened it was a Buick. The trunk was stuck on the back of the car. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like they are now, but this was something. So he just reached in, stepped out in the middle of the street, and shot the tear gas into the house. So the guy comes out, and they get him. He shot him.
And so you were right there.
So Ned is sitting there, and I'm watching, and my father just comes back, puts the gun back in the car, and then takes us on down to my grandmother's. And here it was only about 3 or 4 years ago, and Ned said, Toddy, he always called me Toddy, he said, do you remember the smell of that damn gas gun? I said, yes, I do.
That's great.
But the thing was, I always see, there was humor in it. It wasn't it was just an errand he had to do, like he'd have to pick up a loaf of bread or pour milk. The thing was, the police department did not have a gun of their own.
Who was the chief of police then?
Oh, God.
That you were young, would that have been Jared
Oh.
Murphy?
Why, I don't know.
What year was it?
30s. 34, 35 maybe?
Yeah, Jared Murphy died September of 35, so it was probably him. If it was not before, if it was after, if it was before
I'd
September.
have to look you know what I mean, I'd have to, boy.
What was,
But I know I was little, and it was certainly, I mean, it was way before I was 8.
Yeah.
And young enough that Ned had to, and I think Chuck was old enough that he didn't have to have a babysitter per se, but Ned and I did.
So your dad actually worked with the police from time to time?
Oh,
They'd
very
call
much
him?
so. Oh, yeah.
What was that relationship with the police and with the sheriff's department?
Very good. And the FBI.
So he worked for the
Oh,
feds
yes,
too?
very good. As I said, the man, he was an honest man. Just because he wasn't a good family man doesn't mean he wasn't a good, I can't say family man, but still in all, just because he wasn't a good family man, he was still a very, very good man and good friend to an awful lot of people. He taught an awful lot of young men how to box in this town. He used to have in our old barn up here, where you would now put a car, and it used to be for the carriages and the stalls. That's how the garages used to be. Instead of that, they were barns. But he had a ring set up there, and we had kids here learning how to box and fight all the time. He had the first referees. He was the first one registered as a referee in the state of Montana. He loved prize fighting. He loved boxing, and he was very good at it. He taught Mihelich and all of them.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you remember what the relationship was with the federal authorities?
Nobody thinks about it, but Butte was a prime target, and I'd have to say for sabotage.
Okay.
I mean, really, we were in World War II, we were 10th on the list of the most desired cities to be bombed in the United States. The manganese. You couldn't have won the war without the manganese. Well, you couldn't have won World War I without the copper. But it was manganese in World War II that really, really kept Butte. And there were many people that tried to get through to disrupt the mining. So it was a federal. More so, and I mean, they brought in, we didn't have enough miners here, and they brought in the black troops.
Do you remember that incident?
Yes, because they put them in the barracks down at the card office, 700 block on East Broadway, which was only 2 blocks from my grandmother's house. Well, we got a couple of hundred poor black fellows here, and it is cold. They bring them in the dead of winter. They didn't have winter clothes. They weren't trained miners. Now, how many black people do you ever knew that worked in a mine?
Were they soldiers?
Yes, Army. And they brought them in here, and there was no social. I mean, there was nothing for them except cold weather. And they just about died. They went down in that heat. The heat killed them. They came up and it's 50 below zero. They're living in an old World War I barracks down on East Broadway. No social. Nothing for them to do. It was a crying shame. And I mean, as much as the Butte people tried they were too afraid of us. They were terrified of whites being friendly to them.
You don't remember what military unit that was or anything about it? Do you remember who?
A couple of hundred of them anyway.
Remember the officers?
Nope.
Were they white or black?
See, now, World War II, of course, I knew you were Warden down there.
You were in that part of town?
Yeah, because my mother was in the hospital and I was down there and the war was on and they didn't have enough men and all the men on the east side had gone to war or gone to Seattle. They didn't have any men to be an air raid warden, so I was the air raid warden.
What did that job consist of?
Going to a meeting at the east side fire hall. And here's this little girl with all these old men. They didn't know what to do with me. But there was nobody on Fawcett Street. And there were other men on Fawcett Street, but they couldn't, I'm going to be honest with you, they couldn't speak English. They still were not. My mother was in the hospital, and she was in for about 4 months. And she had real bad legs. So I had to stay with my grandmother, my aunts. And it was cold, it was better to be there. I couldn't be here alone, I was too young. So they didn't have an air. And of course, no airplane was going to get in this far. But still in all, civil defense said you had to have an air raid warden for every block, or for every area. So I was the one for the east side.
Did you have a helmet or anything like that? Or?
Oh yes, I had plaques, and I had a clipboard with all the names. People lived in each houses. Oh, I was very officious.
What kind of plaques? What?
Just a clipboard with, you know what I mean, that you could go and write. Just a clipboard.
Okay.
But you had identification that you were the air raid warden. And I'm sure they were just old mine helmets.